monsters coming down the hall. Spires cover all the walls. Serial killer is on the line. Wants to know if you have the time. Aliens are landing soon. This will mean certain doom. A jigsaw sputters and comes alive. Blood and death are close behind. One thing you can be certain of, the zombies just can't get enough. Just one more bite is all they want. The ghosts downstairs are on the hunt. The Shade Chronicles are keeping score. That's what all the writing's for. They record the stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Welcome to the Shade Chronicles, an anthology-style podcast featuring short works of fiction and serial prose, specifically with a sci-fi and horror flavor. Your hosts for the podcast are Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey.
Hi, this is Derek Leftridge.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story.
The Shade Chronicles are keeping score. That's what all the writing's for. They record the stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Brothers Time Part 3, Crescendo. Kale and Colt hear drag noises from above and stop hearing dripping noises into the storage cellar space they have been hiding in the darkest corner. The dragging sound gets increasingly distant, and then they do not hear anything above. Colt says quietly to Kale, "We should get out of here and out of this building." After hearing this basic explanation from Colt, who slowly walks to the ladder, Kale comments, "Well, plans are good. Can the plan involve getting us back home?" Kale drops his head and begins to cry quietly. Colt stops, walks back to his brother, grabs his brother by the shoulders and says, Yes, we will be leaving as soon as we return to the stables." Kale wipes his tears away, looks at his brother and replies, "I still can't believe this is real, but I'm glad you're here." The boys hug, and then, as they come apart, Kale asks, "How did you get here?" Colt explains, "I've been coming here for a while now. I followed this thing here the first time you sensed it in the house, and I've been coming here every few days to understand what it is and what can be done to stop it." Kale interrupts, "So that thing we hear and sense at home is the same as this thing?" Colt answers, "Not exactly. The thing in the general store is a Malantroy, and what you sense at the house is the presence of the Malantroy. The presence, even though dangerous, is a placeholder in time for the actual Malantroy. The real thing can be from any time or era, and in that time and era, they are the strongest." Kale asks, "Have you figured out how something like that happened and why?" "What I was able to find out," Colt explains, "the thing, a Malantroy, was a creature that was conjured up by the Indians and English settlers who became friends at the Roanoke settlement, which is close to this area. They wanted to spiritually make something that could help them fight against other ruthless English settlers when they arrived. Unfortunately, the Malantroy betrayed them all and killed them, causing the legend of the disappearing colony of Roanoke." "So that thing is the reason the Roanoke settlement we learned about in history class disappeared?" Kale asks. "How are we supposed to stop this thing?" Colt summarizes, "Well, what I have found out is that the Malantroy is weaker in our world, and to get rid of it, we need to send the presence back here and then kill the Malantroy in our time, in our house." Both look at each other for a few seconds, and then Colt says, "Are you ready to go home?" Kale continues, "Yes, but how do we send that thing at home here and kill a Malantroy even if it's weak?" Colt answers, "Well, we need to get the presence into the dumbwaiter and then distract the Malantroy and kill it. Simple." Kale stares at Colt with fearful eyes. Colt says, "I will protect you. We can kill this thing together." Both begin to climb the ladder to the top door cautiously. As both emerge from the sub-storage area, they can see bloodstains everywhere on the floor of the storage room and all around the trap door. They look towards a destroyed door to the storage room, and they can see through the store out into the street. The sun is getting brighter as it rises, and this would be a beautiful sight, but they are distracted by 3 long streaks of blood swaying back and forth on the store floor to the street. They did the best they could to walk through the store and not step in the blood, but this ended up being impossible. Colt exits the store first and begins to descend the front steps to the street and the stables, but Cale stops on the steps and says, "Hey, are you looking for that Melantroy thing?" Colt replies, "I believe it's gone back to our home to be with its presence and is waiting for us there." "Okay, so how do you know this?" Cale asks. "Well," Colt responds, "the blood trail crosses the road to the stables, and that lumpy item next to the front of the stables is what is left of the guy who let us in the storage area to begin with." Cale says, "So the Melantroid got its energy to travel through time from eating enough of that dude for the trip?" Colt comments, "Something like that." Colt quickly crosses the road and enters the stables as Cale begins a fast walk toward the stables to join him. Cale can see Colt in one of the stalls moving hay away from the entrance of the buried dumbwaiter, and from behind hears someone yell, "Hey, you should not be in here." Cale turns and sees someone coming in the barn doorway. In his panic, he trips, falls on the ground, and looks over to where his brother is, and Colt is gone. Cale looks back to where the person yelled, and no one is there, but there is a loud commotion outside the barn in the street. Cale gets up and runs to the stall and begins to check through the hay for his brother, but he's not there. Scared and lost, Cale sits in a spot on the hay and puts his head in his hands, but then he feels a big blast of air, looks up from his hands, and he is now in the dumbwaiter, and the dumbwaiter is moving. The dumbwaiter stops and there is silence as Cale slowly slides the door open. The hallway is filled with dark shadows and nothing seems to be different from when he left. The time he was gone is a blink of an eye in this world, but he and his brother were in another time for 8 hours, and everything they experienced and endured is imprinted on their mental state. As Cale slowly gets out of the dumbwaiter and gets into the hallway, he looks towards his bedroom door and does notice something. It is his brother Colt lying on the floor, not moving, and looks to be breathing very shallowly. Cale cautiously begins to approach his brother, but then is slammed to the hallway floor. The Melantroid puts a foot on his chest and bends down closer to his face. Cale tries to reason with the monster as it holds him down to the cold wood floor. Breathing is not easy, and as a last-ditch effort, he says in a labored voice, "You don't have to do this." The Melantroid monster's eyes begin to fade from black glossy orbs to lightened gray eye color with a small black pupil. The heavy breathing and snarled growls stop, and a more normal yet deep voice says,
"I don't want to harm you, and if I had a normal life, I would have never been in this frame of mind. All I wanted was to be loved and have a family, but..."
The monster shook his head and took a deep breath. The air smelled rancid, and it looked right at Cale. The eyes that were normal a few moments ago are now bloodshot with black orbs again, and the voice has changed. He cannot make the mental change, and Cale can see this by the Melantroid's face and eyes that show the struggle is painful, but the bad entity is powerful and has him under complete control. The monster lifts its head with a snarl and soul-killing growl and says,
"I'm never going to be what I was before, and neither will you."
The Melantroid jerks Cale up by his neck and slams him against the wall, but then looks confused. With its anger and madness focusing on Cale, it does not see what is happening behind him in the shadowed hallway. From behind, Colt attacks the Melantroid by shoving a long piece of wood with a sharp, jagged, and bloody end between the shoulder blades of the Melantroid. The angle is in, but up, and comes out of the front of the Melantroid, right below its throat, but close to the body, and it goes into the submental area right under the chin and slams up into the skull and out of the top of the form rigid head. The Melantroid shakes its head as if clearing out cobwebs from a nap and releases its grip on Cale, causing him to fall to the floor. The Melantroid snarls its face and walks forward 2 lumbering steps, drops its black eyes towards the floor, falls slowly forward, and lands with a leathery slap on its knees onto the floor. Its upper torso moves forward, lands on the floor, causing the body to extend about a foot, and this pushes the protruding wood into the wall, which causes it to retreat back into the Melantroid's skull with a fleshy squelch sound. For its last trick, it manages to roll over and then lay still, and the next second, a dark orange slimy substance first sprays, but then begins to drizzle out of its maw, and then it moves no more. Breathing heavy, Colt says, We did it. Cale asks, "Where's the Malin-Troy presence?" Colt explains, "When the time machine dumbwaiter thing left before you got in, I came back and got in and got it to go into the dumbwaiter." Cale notices Colt's not looking too well and a bloody stain on Colt's shirt, and it begins to grow. Colt looks down and then falls down. Epilogue. 2 weeks later, we see Cale and Colt look on as the home they have only known up to this part of their lives is demolished by 3 large cranes. After the Malin-Troy was killed, the home began to erupt in flames. Cale and Colt's parents woke up and were able to get them all out of the home and Colt to the hospital because, as their parents still call it, a strange accident during the fire caused him to be injured. Since the house was considered an historic land, it appraised much higher, and this was why his parents decided to destroy it and move on after the fire damage. A car pulls up, and the driver's window rolls down, and their father's hand shoots out and waves them to the car, and this causes the boys to walk towards their father's car. A dark figure stands across the street from the boys in an alleyway between 2 homes. It looks at the boys as they jog to their parents' car. The figure is holding a deck of cards with a purple piece of fabric wrapped around in its hand. The figure says to itself, "It is time to meet up with Boone at the in-between state, and I have a great idea for him involving these cards." A hand drops to the figure's left shoulder and says softly, "You know it has to be the ultimate choice of the advancing subject." The dark figure replies, "You're right. I just wanted to suggest an option that could lead to a good tale."
Attention Shade Chronicle podcast listeners. The merchandise store is now open. You can find the merchandise store on the merchandise tab on the Shade Chronicles website, which is at theshadechronicles.com. Find premium t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, travel mugs, ball caps, and more at the Shade Chronicles podcast merchandise store. We now resume your regular program. The Devil Walking by Lawrence Trokey. The man in dark clothing walked casually along the side of the 2-lane blacktop. It was Halloween just before dark, and the streetlights were coming on in the sleepy suburban town of Eureka. The road was relatively busy considering the time of day and that it gave access to several shopping centers and businesses along it. The man walked along the road for several minutes, cars rushing by just a few feet away. Passers-by might have thought the man was staying at the cheap motel on the edge of town that usually housed immigrant workers who were seeking employment at the local Six Flags amusement park or at some other industrial business in the area. Many of such walkers would traverse the road to go to the Walmart about a mile up from the hotel, since they did not have resources for transportation. Public transportation was unheard of in this area. The man passed the Walmart shopping center and found a street that would lead him back to one of the residential areas. He turned up the street and continued to walk towards the subdivisions up the hill. There was a chill in the air, but the temperature was still relatively mild for the time of year. It was going to be a great evening for trick-or-treating. A casual observance of the man walking would reveal little detail. He wore dark pants, shirt, and shoes. His coat might have been a military-style utility coat with a hood, which he draped over his head, obscuring the features of his pale, white face. Maybe if you stared for a moment, you'd see a jet-black goatee on his angular chin, but that was about it for his facial features. The hood kept the rest of his face a secret. The sky continued to darken, and the sound of children could be heard in the wind. Clearly, trick-or-treating was beginning in the area. The dark man walked toward the sound. A group of kids in costume being escorted by parents, all of whom were armed with various alcoholic beverages, traversed down the sidewalk alongside one of the main streets of the subdivision. They pushed a few strollers and walked dogs in costume behind the pack of children running from house to house, trying to fill their sacks with glorious candy and treats. This particular group had laid siege to one side of the street and was working their way back now on the other side of the street. They encountered the dark man at the corner of a main intersection to the subdivision. The older kids noticed him first. A man in a coat and a hood standing beneath a single street lamp, his face and most of his form in shadow. It made them stop in their tracks and grab hold of the younger members of their group, who protested at impeding their efforts to get more candy. The kids waited until the parents pushing strollers and walking dogs caught up to them. The dark man did not move from his position under the street lamp. "Joey, what's wrong? Why did you stop?" Joey's mother said, and then caught sight of the dark man. "Bob, come here, please." She summoned her husband when she saw the man standing directly in their path ahead. Clearly, this person did not belong in their neighborhood, she thought. Probably one of those immigrant workers from the hotel wandering around. Bob dutifully obeyed his summons. "What?" was his response to his wife's beckoning. "Look at that guy standing there," she said under her breath and indicated to him with a red solo cup of fun juice. "What's his deal?" "Look, I don't know. What do you want me to do?" Bob was annoyed at being called away from bullshitting with the other parents and joking around. "The kids are scared. Should we turn around?" She too was scared after looking over the figure under the street lamp. There was something about the way he stared back at them that gave her the creeps. "I'll be back. Hold my beer," Bob said, and he went towards the stranger with a little swagger in his step. As Bob approached, the stranger smiled at him. Bob really couldn't see any facial features, but he felt as though he was being smiled at, and that kind of bothered him. "Hey, buddy, you mind moving over and letting us pass? We're just trying to get some more trick-or-treating in here before it gets too late," Bob said with his big boy voice, trying to intimidate the man. "No, I don't mind at all," the dark man said, and the way he said it gave Bob the creeps. He thought the guy was smiling again. Bob swallowed hard. After a few seconds, Bob decided that discretion was the better part of valor and turned to go back to the group of kids and parents, who were taking a moment to look through their bags and show off their haul so far, which was considerable. "All right, let's go back this way," he said, indicating to the direction they had already been. "But Daddy, we've already been that way," his 5-year-old son, dressed as a stormtrooper, protested. "Yeah, I don't care. We're going back." When a couple of the parents questioned his decision, Bob told them, "Then you go fucking deal with that guy. I'm out." And that was the end of it. Slowly, the group turned back down the road from the direction they had come. The dark man watched them go. He laughed to himself. He was disappointed, but the night was still young. One of the parents decided this was bullshit and called the police. He explained there was this creepy dude walking around their subdivision, and he looked like a serial killer. When the operator reminded him it was Halloween and that it could be someone in a costume, the parents said it was not like that. This guy was genuinely not right. The Eureka PD, being amenable to the request of local taxpayers, decided to send a car to check it out. They found the dark man walking along a stretch of road leading out of the subdivision towards the main road. They pulled the police cruiser behind him along the shoulder of the road and flashed the vehicle's lights. The dark man stopped walking, but did not turn around to face the approaching officers. "Let's see some hands. Get 'em up," ordered the first officer. The man complied and raised his hands. "Put them on the back of your head." The man did as instructed. "Is there a problem, officers?" Still not facing the police, the dark man asked from where he stood. The officer approached and patted the man down. She instantly felt something strange happening. It was like touching the man triggered some sort of nervous reaction in her. Trying to compose herself, she ordered, "Let's break out some ID." "I don't have any," the dark man replied, "but I think you will figure out who I am eventually." "What is your name?" she asked. "I have many names. Names that are older than the land you see or the air you breathe. The one that I am best known by is the oldest one, and it is the worst of them all. It is..." He said the name, but it came out more like a growl or a scream or something else. Something worse. The sound of the name of the dark man frightened the female officer to her core. Feeling threatened, she pulled her pistol, aiming it at the back of the dark man's head. "Turn around!" "Hey, whoa!" the other officer said, stunned at the female officer's behavior. "Take it easy. I got this." He was on the radio when the female officer was talking to the man and did not see or hear what took place. He stepped in between her and the dark man while instructing her to holster her firearm. The dark man was facing them now, and the officer got a look at him for the first time. His eyes were shadowed by the hoodie, but the officer could see the dark man's nose, which was thin and sharp. His lips were also thin and were surrounded by a jet black mustache and goatee that was trimmed close. It accentuated everything the dark man said, making his expressions seem bigger than they were. An unsettled feeling came over the officer, but he choked it down and tried to stay calm. "You live around here?" the officer asked the dark man. "No, but I'm not usually very far away. Just waiting for the right time." They weren't kidding about this dude being creepy, the officer thought. Deciding not to take any chances, the officer broke out his handcuffs and instructed the man to turn around while he put them on. Touching the man made the officer uncomfortable, but he continued to be professional. They escorted the man to the back of the police vehicle. After another quick search, they loaded him into the back of the patrol vehicle. The female officer riding shotgun called into headquarters, informing them of the situation. She was starting to calm down, but was still wary of the man. They drove off heading towards the center of town. The dark man sat in the center of the back seat. "You know, it's a shame what this night has become. It used to be so magnificent and powerful. Now it's just a mockery of what it used to be," the dark man said from his seat in the back. Well, that's too bad," the male officer responded while navigating the police cruiser onto the main road. "The world has been pacified, taken over by lambs, while the wolves have been banished for being too powerful, too aggressive, too bloodthirsty." "Okay, just settle down back there," the female officer instructed. She was still really on edge, and his comments weren't helping her feel any better. "And you, the peacekeepers, separating the lambs from the wolves. You're just lambs yourselves, pretending to be something more. You don't have the hunter's instinct, the bloodlust, to do what real hunters desire to do." As he said this, he leaned forward and brought his hands over the seat. This particular vehicle did not have a cage or barrier separating the front and back seats. The handcuffs dangled loosely from his left wrist. The female officer noticed first and was instantly alarmed. "Didn't you restrain him when you put him in the back?" She knew her partner had done so. How the hell did this guy get loose? Her hand drifted down to her pistol grip. The other officer turned towards the dark man just as a hand grabbed his face. Long, sharp nails dug into his skin and kept him from turning away. The female officer screamed, tried to pull her pistol while reaching for the dark man, attempting to free her partner from his grip. Blood spurted and spilled down the sides of the officer's face as he struggled to free himself from the man's powerful grip, while also trying to maintain control of the vehicle, which was now swerving back and forth across the road. The officer finally was released from the dark man's hand, but not before a significant portion of his face was ripped away in the process. The pain caused him to release his hold on the steering wheel, and that sent the police cruiser headfirst into a drainage ditch that ran alongside the road. Airbags released on impact, and the vehicle stopped with the back end sticking up out of the ditch. The car passing by immediately stopped when the driver saw the crash. He got out of his car and approached the vehicle, but he stopped halfway when he heard the sounds of an animal roaring, and more sounds of something being shredded and ripped by what he imagined were terribly sharp claws. He watched the cruiser rock back and forth for a few seconds, and then he saw one of the doors swing open. A dark man emerged from the wrecked vehicle. In the light of a nearby street lamp, the driver saw the blood that covered his dark form. He was saturated with it. The driver ran for his vehicle, tripped and fell on the blacktop, scrambled to his feet, and started to flee for his life again. He got another foot or so before he was lifted off his feet by the nape of his neck from the back. The dark man had him by his coat, and his feet dangled a few inches over the ground. "Ah, yet another lamb," the dark man said into the ear of the frightened driver. Then he swung the driver by the neck and threw him into the path of a passing truck. The driver of the truck was on his phone at the time and failed to see the wrecked police cruiser or the dark man standing on the side of the road. He looked up when he heard the sickening crunch of a body slamming into the front of his truck and then rolling underneath his truck's wheels. The truck driver stomped on his brakes, skidded to a stop, and then jumped out of his truck. He stood there in the middle of the road, stunned by the carnage laid out before him. His hand shook as he dialed 911. The dark man was gone. A few miles away, the cool of the evening caused some ground fog to form in the old Eureka Cemetery. The two teenagers making out in the back of the parked 2007 Mitsubishi Lancer Evo X sedan with a huge rear diffuser mounted on the trunk, front and rear bumper extensions with flares, and alloyed rims didn't seem to notice the weather. It was practically impossible for them to see anything out of the windows since they were all fogged up. The bumping, grinding, dry humping, sloppy wet kissing went on for several minutes, increasing the heat and humidity levels in the cabin of the Evo. Then, with no warning, a huge crash shook the car and shook them out of their hormone-induced fondling and slobbering. They sat next to each other on the back seat, wide-eyed, staring at the moisture-covered windshield. "What the fuck was that?" Billy asked. "I don't know. Did something hit the car?" Shelley asked in return. "Better fucking not. I just got a new paint job that cost a fortune." Billy moved into the front seat, climbing over the center console from the back. It was only something a young person could do with pliable bones and ligaments since the cabin was a little tight. He wiped the inside of the windshield with his hoodie, which he had discarded earlier during the canoodling with Shelley. First swipe at clearing the windshield revealed the face of a dead deer. Shelley screamed and Billy jumped. He wiped the windshield again and saw the body of the dead deer was laying across his freshly painted hood. "Holy shit!" Billy exclaimed. He wasn't sure if he was more scared or just pissed at the damage the deer's body caused to his precious car. He reached for the door handle and Shelley stopped him. "What are you doing? You can't go out there." "I gotta go move the deer off the hood so I can see to drive out of here." Billy didn't want to go outside, but he knew he needed to. "Lock the door behind me if you want. I'll be okay." He stepped outside of his car and slipped on his hoodie. The temperature really dipped since the sun went down, and it was quite chilly now. Billy looked at the deer's body spread across his hood. In the moonlight, he could see the damage it had caused to his hood when it fell on his car. "God damn it," he swore under his breath. "God damn it, indeed." The voice made Billy jump. He turned to the direction he thought it came from and saw a dark hooded man silhouetted by the pale moonlight. He was about a dozen yards away or so. Billy moved closer to the car as he looked at the man. "God does all the damning, all right. It's a one-way ticket straight to hell. Unless you're one of the cool kids, that is." "Are you one of the cool kids, Billy?" the dark man asked, his breath in the cool air, a cloudy mist shrouding his head. "How did you know my name?" Billy asked in a faraway voice while his hand felt for the door handle. He gave it a pull, but it didn't open. It was locked. "Open the fucking door, Shelley. I'm not kidding." She must have locked it after he got out, as he suggested. From inside the Evo, Shelley moved up to the front seat and reached for the door lock. She pressed it, but it did not release the lock. Billy pulled on the handle several times with no result. "Now, Shelley," he half ordered and half begged her to unlock the door. "I'm trying, but it's not working," she yelled back at him through the glass window. She kept working the lock, but even though she heard it click, it would not release. She looked up and yelled, "Run, Billy! Get out of here!" But Billy was no longer near the door and nowhere to be seen. Where did he go? With the dead deer obscuring her view forward, she didn't really see what had gotten Billy scared enough to get back in the car. She thought she heard someone speaking to Billy, but wasn't sure. She sat in the car for several seconds wondering what to do. Finally, she decided, dead deer or not, she was going to have to drive the car out of there and get help. She crawled over the center console to get to the driver's seat. She reached for the key, but it was not there. Billy must have it with him in his pocket. Now what? She sat there for a few seconds when something slammed against the passenger door glass hard. She looked at it and saw Billy's face pressed up against the glass. His nose pressed to it so hard he looked like he had a pig face. She screamed at the sight of it. Then something pulled Billy's face away, and it was replaced by another face, that of the dark man. His thin lips stretched into a wicked smile, with his black goatee framing it. Panicking, Shelley pulled the driver's side door handle, and this time the door opened. She fell out of the car, got to her feet, and started running blindly into the dark cemetery. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the dark man several yards away. She ran harder, trying to escape. When she glanced again, somehow the dark man was only a few feet away. Terrified, she ran full out now, legs pumping, arms flailing, gasping in the cold evening air. She looked behind her again after a few moments, and the dark man was gone. She started to slow down now, feeling fatigued. When she looked forward again, the dark man was there in her path. She skidded to a stop. She wanted to scream, but didn't have enough air in her lungs to do so. She just panted hard and slowly backed away. A tree root caused her to fall onto the ground. She started crawling away as tears streamed down her face. The dark man walked casually behind her. "So many lambs, so little time," he said to no one in particular. Shelley started to cry now, and her body just went limp. She sobbed into the ground as the dark man approached. There, dear." He kneeled down next to her. He patted her on her back for a moment. "Well, best get on with it. This might sting a little." He was caught off by another voice from behind. "Hold, demon!" "What the fuck?" the dark man said, and then turned around to face an old man holding a large gold crucifix out in front of him. "Oh, jeez, you're no fun, are you?" he said to the old man who was approaching them slowly. Shelley looked up from the ground and saw the old man. He wore a light-colored trench coat. It was like the kind she had seen in old movies about private eyes that her grandpa liked to watch. He was clean-shaven, and his face was lined with wrinkles. His white hair was cut short, and it reminded her of a military-style haircut, shaved on the sides with the longer hair on top. "Back to the abyss with thee," the old man commanded, the giant crucifix now held with both hands in front of him. "I'm not ready to go back yet. I'm busy," the dark man screamed at the old man. He reached for Shelley. She scrambled away, but was caught by the ankle by the dark man. His grip was like a steel trap. "Release the lass, and I won't render thou asunder like before. Doth thou remember, eh? A rather painful transmutation, if I doth recall correctly." "Go to hell!" The dark man stood up and yelled at the old man. He was full of rage and started to advance on the old man. "Hast it thy way, demon." The old man swung the giant crucifix like a broadsword, and it landed on the demon just as it was lurching at the old man. The blow knocked him back past where Shelley lay, and he slid to a stop near an old leaning tombstone. The old man held up the crucifix in both hands in front of him and started chanting softly. Shelley could not make out anything he said. Suddenly, the ground started to shake all around her. The demon felt it too, even though he was quite stunned by the blow he had received. The shaking intensified until the ground started to open up underneath him. Wisps of fire and light began peeking through cracks in the ground underneath the demon. The wider the cracks got, the more fire and light shot through until the area around him was very bright and on fire. His clothing burned away instantly, leaving him naked, stumbling around while the ground continued to shake. The old man said something a bit more emphatically than anything he had said up to this point, and the demon was lifted in the air above a hole that opened in the ground. "Farewell, demon. Should our paths ne'er cross again, it shall be too soon." With that, the old man slammed the cross into the ground in front of him. At the same time, the demon seemed to be pulled and stretched towards the hole. He was stretched beyond what it seemed was physically possible until he disappeared into the hole. Then the ground pulled itself together and the shaking stopped, leaving Shelley and the old man alone in the cemetery. Shelley looked at the old man from where she laid on the ground. She sat up and said, "Thank you." "Thou art welcome, my lady," the old man said, and then formally bowed like he was addressing royalty. "Vanquishing the demon was mine pleasure. Alas, the reason I am hither is because of thou." "Me?" Even though the man spoke strangely, Shelley seemed to understand what he meant. "Aye, I am a demon hunter who is content and ready to enter my final rest. Thou art to be mine replacement, so that this realm might enjoy peace and security anew," the old man explained. "What the fuck?" was all Shelley could say. Okay, folks, so we've just listened to those two stories. We got Brothers Time Part 3, which we're going to discuss now with its author, Derek Leftridge. So we finally come to the conclusion of this three-part story of these brothers and their struggle with this monster, this beast. We got a little backstory about how the monster came to be in the last episode, and now it's all come to a head, and we've got the final confrontation, what they have to do to resolve this thing. So, Derek, tell us all about it. What were you thinking?
The basic part of it is just kind of like a brother's story. They need each other. They do care about each other. They do mess with each other and bust each other up. And I wanted that kind of thing to come out. But also, I wanted to see that their struggle with this creature and the thing that was bothering the younger brother, which is Kale. Colt's a little bit older, not by much, and how they worked together and completed this whole mission of what they did with a lot of things in between. And then, wanted to make sure that we kind of had a cliffhanger on the end of it with the discussion of the dark figure noticing them from a distance at the very end. And maybe more of that'll come out someday. Maybe it won't. But it's related to recent stuff we talked about with the Shade Chronicles, the Shade character, things like that. And it's pretty much where we left it. But yeah, it was a three-parter. Wanted to do a multiple part piece. I think last time I mentioned that I liked the second part in the sense of I created the story with the second part and then built the first and third around it.
So the brothers, I'm sorry, Kale, right?
And Colt.
And Colt. Colt's the older one.
Correct. Very
But
little bit.
You,
but
you
yeah.
said Kale was the one who was being terrorized by the monster,
Mhm.
but Colt has some experience with this thing.
Right.
So Colt is actually already trying to solve the problem of the
Mhm.
monster.
To kind of help his little brother, but
Yeah.
there's other stuff that could be, layers of it. But yeah, he's trying to help his little brother because he knows his little brother's dealing with this thing in the house, which ends up being the Mountjoy presence.
Right.
And then his brother finds out that there's more to it, and there's actually a monster attached to it that he goes and investigates, sees the history of it, and deals with that. Actually, the history of something that I really cared a lot about when I was in high school, which was in North Carolina, which was the history of the Roanoke disappearance of the individuals that were on that island. And I wanted to kind of pull that into it because I always loved that story because there's really been no answer. And it's probably the oldest sci-fi horror story I've ever known.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I want to kind of pull that in. I tried to hint to it with different parts of the story that they're in that area by the coast, on the East Coast, things like that, because it's, on the East Coast. But wanted to kind of pull that together, bring that to the front, but then also show still that the brothers are brothers and brothers time together, time travel.
Yeah, no, I love the way you did that historic horror story or that historic mystery about the Roanoke Island stuff. I like the way you wove that into this as a possible explanation as to what happened.
Right.
That's cool. I thought that was a really nice
that was fun.
Nice way of touching on that. But so the brothers, they come together, then they're separated at one part, and you think worst possible situation.
Yeah. Colt ended up disappearing. Kale can't find him, but then Kale is transported to the environment, but he finds out that Colt may or may not be injured until the end, where he notices that Colt's not talking very well and has some type of injury, and then just falls to the ground. Kind of jump ahead to the epilogue to explain that they're both okay, but the story's not over, possibly.
Yeah. And I tell you, I was about to get pissed at you. If you were going to kill off Colt, I was going to be mad.
No.
I don't like it when, we got these sad endings and these kids are dead or whatever. So I'm grateful that you pulled that one off and solved that situation in a
I wouldn't have done that to you.
So yeah, okay. So Brothers Time. So there's a hint at maybe there's some more stuff coming. We probably got the cue with the deck of cards and the ribbon, and we've seen that before in the antique
Last Bazaar. Yeah.
Yes. So there's possibly something still coming on that, but at least as far as the brothers are concerned, they have solved their problem and things have ended.
Correct.
I mean, even though the house got burnt down,
Yeah.
you know, you know,
They got paid.
they're fine now, and they can
Yeah.
move on and get on with their lives.
Correct.
Cool,
Correct.
cool, cool. All right, so that was Brothers
All
Time
right.
3.
So then we have a one episode, right? It wasn't a
Yeah,
continuation.
one
Yeah,
off.
that's what
Yeah,
I thought. A one-off, The Devil's Walking, or sorry, The Devil Walking,
yeah.
by Lawrence. And I I don't know. I really like the last episode of season 1 that you did called Santa Claus,
Yeah.
but I don't know this one might be better than that in the sense of I love the humor. I love the arrogance. I love just the people, the personalities, and the words and the descriptions and just the talking. I mean, jumping ahead, but you ended it on a curse word, and that just does great things for me. I'm just saying. Go ahead.
That was fun. So, the ending, I guess we could talk about that since you brought it up. I wanted the situation to be kind of one of those double takes. It's like, what? What do you
Hmm.
mean? This is
Right.
what it ended on. So I didn't want the girl to be killed by this demon, and I wanted the demon to finally be defeated. So coming up with this idea of this ancient demon hunter tracking him down and finally finding him just in the nick of time to save this girl
Which was awesome.
was a good, was nice. But then I'm like, well, there's got to be more to this than that. Why all of a sudden it just is too coincidental for this guy
Yeah.
to show up to save this girl. So what if he was there not to save her, but to actually find her, and in the process he has to save her to bring her on board with what he wants her to do, which is to take over for him. So
I
so
like stories like that. I just want to. I'm sorry. I like stories like that, and I like when they come out of nowhere with it. Some of them are hokey. I had that feeling.
sure.
This one was really good because I did not see this coming, and I just like how it kind of does the continuation type of thing. And it was a good story.
Well, thank you. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
it was fun for me. It was fun. I like having fun.
And this was essential Halloween story. I mean, this episode is dropping
Yeah.
right around Halloween, and I wanted to have that kind of feel. And so I'm not usually a horror story guy, but because of Halloween, I decided let's go down that path. And of course, it had all of the cliches in
Oh
it.
yeah, you got to have that.
Whole horror Halloween story with this weird stranger being in this place and causing all of this carnage as he is walking around town and doing these things, and he just is so terrifying and so dark.
Mhm.
So it's the same like Halloween or Friday the 13th or all of the Freddy Krueger, all of
Yeah.
these bad guys. I was trying to come up with someone that would stand up in that lineup and be able to
Oh yeah,
hold his own.
you did that, and you gave them all a voice.
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that they all had a little bit of personality coming through, and that's part of my philosophy with writing stories that I know we've all heard before.
Mhm.
I wanted to bring out a unique and hopefully entertaining voice
Yeah.
for these characters. So I appreciate you noticing that. But other than that, I thought it did what it needed to do to have a nice little horror story wrapped up in the time constraints that we had, and not wanting to make this a big long two-parter or anything like that. I wanted to just get this one in just as a little Halloween special. So I think it accomplished that. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Shade Chronicles. We appreciate you listening. And here's a sneak peek at what's coming in the next episode.
Next time on the Shade Chronicles.
Jay rubs his eyes, leans to his right side, and realizes he is not in bed, but on a couch. Confusion hits him because he does not have a couch in his one-bedroom studio apartment. He searches his brain for some information and quickly remembers the last thing he did was sit in his first-class seat on an airplane, getting settled, leaned back, and drifted off to sleep. Now he is here, whatever or wherever here is, Jay does not know. What is going on? Let me out of this. A very deep, real voice now fills the room and says,
Mr. Lane, you need to follow the clues to get your freedom. This is very important to your ability to free yourself.
Why am I here? How did I get here? Is this a joke or something? Jay asks continuously in frustration. The voice responds,
You have been chosen for an experiment with success or failure. You're succeeding by using the clues and getting out before the timer reaches 0. You're failing by not doing this and suffer dire consequences.
A click is heard and silence screams in the room. Anxiety begins to flow through Jay's body, but he remains in control and decides to play. He's going to play this out, so he begins to look around the room for a flashlight. The clock shows 12:45:00.
The 3 council members stood over the body of the recently deceased news reporter and were speechless. The reporter's body lay sprawled across the hand-knotted Mossad Persian wool rug, his blood now soaking deep into its fibers. Each of the councilmen resisted the urge to fling themselves onto the body for a taste, their primal vampire instinct raising its ugly head. Alexander remained quiet up to this point when he burst out, "How could you do this, Nigel? You have destroyed us all, you fool!" Godric put his hand on Alexander's arm. "This is not time for blame or panic. Nigel did what he thought he needed to do to protect the coven. The reporter was getting close to the truth, too close. We need to determine how we will deal with this and continue protecting the coven." Thanks again for listening to the Shade Chronicles. For comments or inquiries, you can contact us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also get more information at theshadechronicles.com. The Shade Chronicles podcast is the creative property of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey. Stories in this podcast were the sole creation of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey, respectively. Any attempt to replay for broadcast or distribution portions of any episode of the Shade Chronicles without the prior written consent from the creators and/or significant compensation is strictly prohibited. Shame on you for even thinking about it in the first place. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of the Shade Chronicles.